Hello, and welcome back everyone to the absolute beginner tutorial for Git and GitHub. Now, if you have managed to follow along with me up until now, then you are in for a treat because now is the time that we will be diving deep into more interesting stuff and putting our hands onto it. But before we go ahead, I would like to stress over one fine detail. When we clone this repository, which is the learning Git repository, it created a directory on our machine with the same name, learning Git. But why are we calling this particular directory as a repository? Because some of you might think that this is just a folder or a plain simple directory. Why are we calling this with a special name called as a repository? Or to be more specific, we'll be calling it as a local repository because it's on our local machine. So what difference is there? It's completely looking identical to any other directories that we might have on our system. See, there is one major difference. So if you go ahead and type git space status and we hit enter, it says on branch main, no commits yet. Well, definitely Git is recognizing this particular directory as something special because it's saying that it is currently on branch main, no commits yet, and we'll be discussing these terms in just a moment. Git is recognizing this directory as something special. What's special about this directory is that Git is currently tracking all the changes that are going to happen within this directory, and it's going to happen via a special file, which I'll be explaining in just a moment. Now, for a moment, if you just open another tab, I'm using Command T to open a new tab. You can, if you're on a Windows machine, you can go ahead and type Control T, or you can even right click or go to your shell and create a new tab or a new window. Well, if we move ahead, well, in this new tab, if we go one step above this directory by typing the command cd and dot dot, which means change directory, and the double dot means one step above this directory. So one step above is the Git workspace. Now, if we go ahead and type git status and hit enter within this directory, well, Git prompts us with an error saying fatal, not a Git repository. Clearly, there is something special with this learning Git directory that it's not prompting us with the same error message. Instead, it's saying on branch main, no commits yet. Well, it is because this particular directory has a special file called as the .git file. And this file tracks all the changes and modifications in branches and commits that you have on your current Git repository, and it tracks everything down into this particular file. Now, this is starting with a .git. I mean, this file name starts with a dot. So that clearly means that it is a hidden file on your system, and you might not be able to see this file just as is, but we are going to type in a command. I mean, you are not going to visualize this in your folders if you have not configured your directory system to show hidden files and folders. So I suggest you go ahead and do that. But we anyway is going to see this in command line and probably in VS Code as well. So if we go ahead on our terminal, and for Windows users, I'd suggest please use git bash for running these commands, as CMD might not recognize these commands exactly. So let's go ahead and type ls to list all files and -al to actually list all the hidden files as well. And we hit enter, we can see that we do have a .git file present within our current working directory, which is the learning Git. And it is this file that makes Git recognize this directory as a repository. Now, if you have noticed, when I said git status, it says on branch main, no commits yet. Now, these are two very special terms which we are coming across for the very first time. So I think this is time for a quick diagram to explain you what branches are, what commits are, and so that we can go ahead and set our Git to start working and creating files within this directory, or to be honest, repository. Okay, quick diagram. Well, what is a branch? A branch is basically a version of the code base. So whatever code you are doing currently has to be on some branch. And by default, when you clone any Git repository, it comes with a default protected branch called as the main branch. So everything starts off here on the main branch. And from this point onwards, you can create as many branches as you would like, and there's no limit to it. But we start off with one version of the code, and that is the main branch, which has the one of the versions of the code. And from this, you can create different branches. There will be different versions of the code. We can merge these branches. We can do so many things with these branches and the versions of the code within them. But those are the things that we'll keep up for the later lessons. Now, I think you would understand in a more detail when I show this diagram to you. So Git follows this particular workflow. It's a tree-like structure where the root of the tree is the main branch, and that is the starting point. That's the branch that you get when you clone an empty Git repository from GitHub, or you create or initialize this repository on your local machine. And we'll be going ahead and initializing the repository first on the local machine and then pushing it to the GitHub in a later lesson. For this time, we have created the repository first on GitHub, and then we cloned it. So it came by default with a main branch, and that again is the root of the branching structure. And from this root branch, you can create multiple branches, what we refer as a feature branch, or by different name. I mean, different companies have different nomenclature for different branching levels. So what happens exactly is that when you clone a Git repository, you are presented with a main branch. And if any developer is going to take that branch and is going to work on a feature on which he's probably going to work for a little while, he's not going to carry on his work on the main branch itself, because the main branch has to be protected. It has to be production ready, which means any code that resides within the main branch has to be correct, has to be well tested, has to be able to deploy to the production servers at any time. So it has to be a stable version of your code. And if you are working on something that is a new feature that you are going to develop, or a bug that you're going to fix, or some small enhancements or configuration changes that might or might not lead to breaking the code, you would not perform any such operations on the main branch. What you can do rather is you can take that main branch and you can create a new branch out of it. And that new branch, you can call that by any name that you like, but the main branch is reserved. The name main is reserved for the root branch, but you can create any branch with any name, and that's going to come off from the main branch, which in this case is the feature branch that I have here. Now in this feature branch, we will have all the code that was residing in the main branch from that point from which we actually took the code. Now, some of these things might not be very clear until we go ahead and practice these in practical in the VS Code, but I just want to give you a little brief so that you might understand or relate these things later when we are actually performing these changes. So we are taking or creating a new branch called as the feature branch out of this main branch. And all these circles that you are seeing here are actually commits. Now, I realize that this video is getting a little longer, so let's catch up in the next video where we will learn about commits.